Hey friend, I was trying to have one of those peaceful, candle-glowy December evenings. You know, the kind where you sip cocoa and pretend your life is organized. When I found myself standing in the driveway, holding what can only be described as a festive electrical octopus. Christmas lights, tangled beyond reason, possibly sentient. And listen, I tried to be patient. I tried to breathe. I even whispered a few encouraging words to the knot the size of a basketball. But 3 hours later, I was hunched over the coil like a man negotiating with a dragon, while my neighbor Gary lectured me about the difference between tasteful holiday ambiance and what he called blinking yard chaos. Meanwhile, Daisy, sweet, innocent, sock-eating Daisy, decided the extension cord was a seasonal chew toy. Nothing like a dog proudly trotting across the yard with electrical wiring dangling from her mouth to make a man rethink his life choices. So if you're settling in, cozy under the covers, let me take you gently into the glittering disaster that was my Christmas light nightmare. Stay close, friend. This one gets delightfully messy in a very non-dangerous, bedtime-friendly way. I always forget how ambitious I get the first week of December. Something about cold air, peppermint lattes, and the vague pressure of neighborhood holiday cheer makes me believe I'm capable of feats far beyond my actual skill set, like tasteful outdoor decorating, or untangling knots the size of small counties. So there I was, morning coffee in hand, stepping proudly into the yard like a man prepared to conquer the day. Birds chirped, frost sparkled. A neighbor's inflatable Santa wheezed dramatically as it reinflated from its nightly collapse. It was all very magical. Then I opened the storage bin. What stared back at me was not magic. What stared back was a glowing, twinkling, deeply vindictive mass of Christmas light spaghetti. I swear it blinked at me. "Oh no," I murmured. "Not again." Linda stepped onto the porch, sipping tea, wrapped in her fuzzy winter robe that made her look like a cozy woodland sage. "You all right down there?" I held up the tangled disaster. "Do we own scissors strong enough to cancel Christmas?" She grinned. "You'll be fine. Just take your time." "Time," I repeated, staring into the abyss in my hands. Yes, that's what this requires. Not a priest. But I was determined, because this year I had a vision, a warm, cheerful, classy holiday display. Nothing wild, nothing dramatic. Just a few strands of golden lights, maybe a wreath, maybe a tasteful sparkle in the bushes. A simple man, with simple dreams, dreams that were immediately crushed. I sat in the driveway and began the slow, painful process of separating one hopeless twinkle bulb from another. The knots were unbelievable, the kind of knots that suggested these lights had a long internal history of emotional turmoil. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I tugged, twisted, looped, apologized, cursed softly under my breath in family-friendly ways, and even tried sweet-talking the strands like they were a stubborn jar lid. Nothing. I looked up just in time to see my neighbor Gary marching across his lawn with the confidence of a man whose hobby is judging other people's hobbies. Gary prides himself on tasteful decorations. This means 3 things. 1, his wreath is imported from Norway. 2, his lights are solar-powered, European, and allegedly designed by someone who won an award in Sweden for minimalist luminosity expression. 3, he thinks blinking lights are for amateurs and Nostalgically enthusiastic people who lack restraint. Guess which category he believes I fall into? "Morning, Henry," he called, adjusting his scarf in a way that suggested the scarf had won awards, too. "Morning, Gary," I said, holding my tangled light creature like a newborn I didn't fully trust. "Just getting started." Gary leaned in, squinting at the chaos. "Ah, the exuberant lights. They're festive," I said. "They're bright." "That's the point." He nodded in the polite but judgy way he does when someone parks too close to his driveway. "You know, if you ever want your decorations to appear refined instead of chaotic, I could give you pointers." I smiled nicely. "Thank you, Gary. And if you ever want yours to look like they're actually having fun, I'd be happy to help." He blinked. I blinked back. The lights blinked too, which felt like solidarity. Gary sniffed, the universal sign of neighborly disapproval, and walked back to his house. I returned to the knot. At this point, the lights had begun to feel personal. Every time I loosened one section, 2 more sections tightened in revenge. I swear they were doing it on purpose, like the world's least helpful group of elves. 45 minutes passed. I made no progress except discovering that a single bulb from 1998 had welded itself permanently to a plastic reindeer antler ornament. Then Daisy trotted out. My sweet dog, my fuzzy companion, my partner in chaos, she bounded up, tail wagging like a festive metronome. "Oh, Daisy," I said, relieved, "you always cheer me up." She sniffed the lights, tilted her head, then, without hesitation, chomped directly onto the extension cord. "Daisy, no! That's holiday infrastructure!" I lunged forward and gently pried the cord out of her proud little mouth. She looked up at me, confused, as if to say, "Dad, why would you give me a perfectly chewy rope if you didn't want me to nibble it?" "It's not a rope," I explained patiently. "It's electricity spaghetti. You can't eat it." She wagged her tail. I don't think she believed me. Linda called from the porch. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I lied, just teaching Daisy about electrical safety. Daisy trotted away, completely uneducated. Back to the lights. I thought perhaps standing might help, getting a better angle. So I stood, pulled, rotated, tugged in a direction that made no sense physically or emotionally. The knot grew tighter. I sat again, defeated by holiday decor. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. Thought about my life. Considered why anyone chooses to celebrate anything with tiny wires and fragile glass. That's when Gary reappeared, this time holding something. A clipboard. "Oh no." "Henry," he said gently, "I took the liberty of drafting a small diagram that might help you create a more balanced display." He handed me the clipboard. On it was a hand-drawn architectural rendering of my yard, complete with labeled zones. Zone 1, festive restraint. Zone 2, soft sparkle permitted. Zone 3, no blinking under any circumstances. Zone 4, tinsel-free buffer area. I stared at the diagram, then at Gary, then at the diagram again. "Gary," I said softly, "you know I'm just putting up lights for fun, right?" He tilted his head sympathetically. "That's the first step toward tastefulness, Henry." I handed the clipboard back. "I'm going to pretend this conversation didn't happen." A car drove by slowly. The driver looked out the window at me, sitting on the driveway wrestling a strand of lights like a man grappling with festive seaweed. They nodded with the universal expression of, "Buddy, I've been there." I was nearly ready to give up, nearly ready to call it, nearly ready to throw the whole light bundle into the bushes and declare it rustic holiday whimsy. Then, in a brief moment of accidental brilliance, I found the one loop that started it all. A tiny, humble knot near the center. I tugged it gently. The entire bundle loosened. "Oh my goodness," I whispered. "I did it." I rose slowly, hands trembling with victory. I stretched out the strand across the driveway. It glowed proudly in the cold air. Twinkle lights, freed at last. A triumphant ribbon of holiday spirit. Victory. Complete, total victory. I stepped back to admire my success. That's when Daisy returned, holding the extension cord she had entirely chewed through, dangling, sparkless, and entirely essential for the lights to work. "No," I breathed. She dropped the chewed cord at my feet like a trophy. "Daisy," I whispered, "why would you do this to me during the season of giving?" She wagged her tail. Linda leaned out through the front door. "Everything okay?" I held up the chewed cord. She nodded sympathetically. "We've learned not to leave her alone with anything long and noodle-shaped." Gary, of course, noticed immediately. "Henry," he called from across the lawn, "your lights aren't plugged in. That's step 1 in tasteful display theory." I closed my eyes, counted to 10, considered moving to a lighthouse where electricity was optional and neighbors were seagulls. I took a breath. It wasn't over. No, holiday disasters never end with the first disaster. They escalate. I looked at the chewed cord, looked at the lights I had spent nearly 3 hours untangling, looked at Gary, who was now calibrating his decorative front lawn spotlight with a small protractor. And I realized something. This was only round 1. The real chaos was just beginning. I marched into the garage like a man on a quest for a replacement extension cord, a quest powered by equal parts determination, holiday spirit, and the faint emotional wobble that comes from being judged by a man who uses a protractor to aim Christmas lights. The garage, however, had other plans. If you've ever opened a garage door and felt the instant judgment of dozens of items you meant to organize last spring, you know what I was up against. Boxes leaned on other boxes. A rake balanced suspiciously on a bicycle. Something somewhere dripped with a rhythm that suggested it had been dripping since 2019. "Okay," I muttered. "Extension cord. Easy. We have at least 3. I found one immediately. Bright orange, beautifully coiled. I lifted it triumphantly, only to discover Daisy had chewed this one sometime last year, and I had optimistically saved it, just in case. I put it down, not gently. Next, I found a green cord, still intact, still coiled, still hopeful. I tugged one end. It yanked back, because it was connected to something. Something wedged behind the old snowblower that has never blown snow but does a great job impersonating a rusty hippo. I tugged harder. Something in the pile shifted, then groaned, then collapsed. I dove sideways as a small avalanche of gardening tools and a half-deflated pool float poured out. A plastic flamingo looked me dead in the eye, as if to say, "This is why people hire decorators, Henry." I wriggled free, clutching the green extension cord like a prize. "Ha!" I shouted victoriously. That's when I heard it. The sound of Gary clearing his throat, not just any cough. I am preparing to offer unsolicited seasonal advice cough. I turned. He stood at the base of my driveway, arms folded across his Scandinavian-approved winter coat. "Found a cord?" he asked. "Yes," I said proudly. "Green," he observed. "Bold choice, almost theatrical." "It's a cord, Gary." He hummed in a tone that suggested chords could absolutely be judged as a reflection of personal taste. I took a calming breath. "Well, I'm going to plug in my lights now." Gary perked up like a meerkat hearing a suspicious rustle. "Oh, well, before you do..." "No," I said. He blinked. "But you don't even know what I was..." "Still no." Linda poked her head out the front door. "Henry, did you find one?" "Yes," I announced. "One that hasn't been chewed by Daisy, run over by the mower, or cursed by whoever tied our garage into knots." Daisy trotted out proudly, as if she had been praised. Gary stepped closer, lowering his voice like this was a covert operation. "Henry, just remember, subtlety is your friend." "My friend," I said evenly, "is a working extension cord." I marched past him. Gary sighed deeply, the kind of sigh a man releases when he sees someone stacking firewood aesthetically incorrectly. I approached the driveway triumphantly, lights untangled, cord in hand, spirit mostly intact. I plugged the cord into the outlet. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. I jiggled the plug, pushed it deeper, prayed softly to the spirit of holiday electrons. Still nothing. Behind me, Gary exhaled in slow-motion disappointment. "Henry," he began. "Don't," I said. "Not a word." He raised his hands. I wasn't going to criticize. I was going to offer professional feedback. "Same thing." He bit his lip thoughtfully, then nodded. "Fair enough." Linda came outside with a mug of tea and that gentle smile that says, "You're doing great, sweetie, even though chaos follows you like a hobby." "Want me to help?" she asked kindly. "No," I said. "I've got this. It's just..." I pointed at the entirely lifeless light strand. "It's being dramatic." Daisy, meanwhile, sniffed the cord again, as if she were evaluating whether it deserved to continue existing. I kneeled by the lights and checked every bulb, every connector, every plug. And as I moved along the strand, I found it. A tiny break, a single section where the wire had frayed almost imperceptibly. "Of course," I whispered. "The holiday gremlins have attacked." I stood up and faced the sky dramatically, as if appealing to some higher seasonal authority. "Why?" I shouted. "Can't anything be easy?" A small breeze drifted across the yard. A pine cone fell from our neighbor's tree. The universe offered no comfort. Gary, however, offered many words. "It looks like you may have overloaded the strand," he said, leaning forward as though delivering a TED Talk on personal failure. "Or perhaps it's simply a low-quality product." I breathed in, breathed out, reminded myself it was illegal, under the Nap Giggles bedtime guidelines, to even think violent thoughts. "Gary," I said calmly, "I appreciate your attention to details I did not ask you to perceive." He nodded solemnly. "It's a gift." Linda put a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe we take a break? Or go inside and regroup? You look like your soul is overheating." "No," I said firmly. "If I stop now, the lights win." Daisy barked once. I interpreted it as agreement. Probably. I reached for the tangled mess again. Well, the untangled but very uncooperative mess. And suddenly something flickered in my peripheral vision. Across the street, In Gary's yard. Oh no. He had activated his lights all at once. Tasteful, symmetrical golden lines softly glowing under the early dusk. A warm, modest, magazine-approved arrangement with perfectly spaced bulbs and zero personality flaws. Gary folded his arms like a man unveiling a masterpiece. "See," he said softly. "Elegant." Linda whispered, "Wow." Daisy made a sound like a sigh. I closed my eyes, opened them. No matter how I looked at it, this was a display that said, Gary has his life together, and Henry has a garage avalanche. Suddenly, competition built in my chest like carbonated soda. Not unhealthy competition, not neighborly war, just a mild, dignified desire not to be completely outlit. "Okay," I said quietly. "Plan B." Linda stepped back. "Oh dear." Gary frowned. "I don't like the sound of Plan B." "Too late," I said. Plan B was simple. More lights? Because if I couldn't compete with elegance, I could compete with enthusiasm. I rummaged in the bin, pulling out every spare strand we owned. Gold lights, white lights, rainbow lights, a strand that might have been left over from a birthday. 2 that were definitely from Halloween. 1 that may have been from our first apartment in 2007. I plugged them all together. It was a questionable configuration. Possibly illegal, almost certainly unwise. Linda whispered, "Sweetheart, is this safe?" "Define safe," Gary gasped. "Henry, that looks like a fire hazard wearing a disguise." "Good," I said. "It'll scare your tastefulness." Daisy wagged her tail enthusiastically. She understood chaos. She supported chaos. I stepped back, raised the plug, prepared to commit to my lifelong pattern of good intentions and questionable execution. But before I could connect it, a loud pop echoed through the yard. We all froze. Smoke drifted from the end of one strand. Daisy barked in alarm. Linda stepped behind me. Gary whispered, "I knew it. The lights had blown a fuse before even turning on." I stared at the smoldering cord in my hand. And then I laughed. Quietly at first, then louder. A warm, exhausted laugh that shook 3 hours of frustration out of my shoulders. Linda started laughing too. Then Gary, reluctantly, but unable to stop. Even Daisy let out a little huff that I swear was dog laughter. Because of course, this was how my decorating went. Of course the lights rebelled. Of course Daisy ate the infrastructure. Of course Gary performed an unsolicited lighting seminar. Of course my Plan B attempted to self-destruct. This was December. This was my life. This was exactly the kind of holiday chaos that made everything memorable. I looked at the messy, broken, tangled strands on the driveway and smiled. "Okay," I said, "Plan C." Gary swallowed nervously. "Do I want to know Plan C?" I grinned. "Probably not, but it's happening. Because if the lights wanted to fight, if the season demanded drama, if the universe needed me to embrace the absolute absurdity of holiday decorating, then fine. I would rise to the occasion. Plan C was wild. Plan C was bold. Plan C was something I would absolutely regret later. But first, I needed to borrow Gary's ladder. Before I explain Plan C, let me clarify. I'm not usually the kind of person who borrows a neighbor's ladder while that same neighbor is actively questioning my judgment. But holiday decorating has a way of bending a man's dignity into a festive pretzel. I approached Gary slowly, hands raised in peaceful negotiation. "Gary," I said. "Buddy, pal, longtime neighbor with excellent lawn edging techniques." He blinked. "What do you want, Henry?" "A ladder." He inhaled sharply like I'd asked to borrow his favorite cashmere scarf. "For what purpose?" I gestured grandly toward my roofline. "Strategic elevation," Linda muttered behind me. "Oh no. Strategic anything is never good." Gary held his clipboard to his chest. "Henry, this seems reckless." "Everything I do is reckless, Gary. This is just holiday themed." He studied my face for a full 5 seconds, sighed so deeply his scarf fluttered, and then marched to his garage. He returned with his prized aluminum extension ladder, the one he polishes, the one he once called the Cadillac of ladders, while Linda and I exchanged a look that said, "He needs more hobbies." He set it at my feet. "I'm trusting you," he said with the gravity of a man loaning out a beloved family heirloom. "I'll be responsible," I promised. "You won't climb too high?" "Nope." "You won't use it improperly?" "Nope." "Your dog won't chew it. She's only into cords." Gary still looked nervous, but he stepped back. Linda stepped forward. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what Plan C actually is?" I cracked my knuckles dramatically. "Roof lights," she blinked. "We've never done roof lights." "Exactly," I said. "New year, new heights." "This feels wrong," she murmured. Daisy barked in agreement or protest. Hard to say with her. I set the ladder against the house and climbed 3 steps before immediately climbing back down. "Too soon," I whispered. I took a breath, re-centered, pretended I was the kind of man who ascended ladders confidently and not someone who once got stuck halfway up a stepladder because a butterfly startled him. I climbed again, one careful step at a time, until I reached the gutter line. From up here, the world looked peaceful, except for Gary observing me like a safety inspector waiting for disaster. "Stable footing, Henry," he yelled. "Thank you, Gary. 3 points of contact. Got it. Don't lean too far to the—" "Gary," I interrupted gently, "this is a one-man job, but thank you. And please don't calculate my center of gravity." He lowered his protractor slowly. I began attaching the lights, my backup strand, the only one not yet chewed, scorched, or emotionally compromised. Clip, clip, clip. They looked surprisingly good, even tasteful. "Take that, Gary." I was reaching for the next section when I heard the unmistakable sound of something scraping across the driveway. I glanced down. Daisy was dragging something long, something bright, something she should absolutely not have. "Daisy, no! That's the new cord!" Linda gasped. "She found it in the garage. I didn't even know we had another one." Gary pressed a hand to his heart. "She's eating your infrastructure in real time." I began climbing down as fast as one can climb without falling into a shrub. "Drop it, Daisy," I commanded. Daisy looked at me, tail wagging, proudly holding the cord like it was fresh game she'd hunted on the plains. "Drop," I repeated. She dropped it, but directly into a puddle. Linda covered her face. "Oh dear." I lifted the dripping cord gently, like a parent lifting a toddler who'd rolled in something mysterious. Gary tutted. "You can't plug that in, Henry. You'll short out the block." I sighed. "It's okay. I still have the lights on the roof." "Which aren't connected to anything," Gary said softly. I blinked. "We don't need to state truth so plainly, friend." He shrugged. "Okay, new plan. Plan C was transitioning into Plan C2. Find something that works before Gary writes a report about me. I brought the cord inside, dried it thoroughly with kitchen towels, a hairdryer, and eventually the heat vent while Daisy watched like I was ruining her next chew toy. "Sweetheart," Linda said gently, "maybe we stop? Order pizza? Embrace the spirit of surrender?" "Can't," I said. "I'm in too deep. I've already had a small garage avalanche. Gary's suspicious of me. And the lights," I looked outside at the half-lit roofline, "are expecting greatness." Linda stroked my shoulder. "They're not. They're wires. Still counts." By the time the cord was dry, Daisy had moved on to sniffing the decorative pine cones. A dangerous sign. I stepped outside, cord in hand, feeling optimistic again. Gary watched from across the lawn. "Testing phase?" he called. "Don't label my process," I said. I plugged the dry cord into the outside outlet. No sparks. Good sign. Then I plugged the lights into the cord. The roof lights flickered, hiccuped, and then glowed. I gasped. Linda gasped. Even Gary gasped. I stepped back proudly. The lights were bright enough to be festive but warm enough to avoid airport runway energy. Just a gentle golden outline across the gutter line. "Henry," Linda said softly, "it's beautiful." Gary nodded respectfully. "I'm impressed." My heart swelled like a snow globe being shaken dramatically. "It's working," I whispered. "Everything's working." Then, just as the moment reached its peak, a squirrel leapt from a branch onto the gutter. The gutter wobbled, the light clips strained. The squirrel chirped aggressively. And somewhere below us, Daisy barked with the passion of 1,000 small, furry warriors. "No, no, no! Stay calm! Everyone stay calm!" I yelled. The squirrel scurried directly across the lights. The strand swayed. Gary shouted, "Henry! Gutter compromise at 2 o'clock!" Linda shouted, "Sweetheart, do not climb the ladder again." Daisy shouted her own opinions. And the lights, my beautiful, newly functional, painstakingly installed lights, began to unclip. One bulb, then another. Then half the strand dropped in a sad, sagging swoop. I stared in disbelief. Then, twinkle, flop. The entire right side slid off the gutter like it had simply given up on gravity. The squirrel darted away. Daisy chased it. Gary shielded his clipboard like falling lights might violate zoning standards. Linda whispered, "Oh, sweetheart." I exhaled the longest sigh known to human lungs. It wasn't anger. It wasn't despair. It was acceptance. Acceptance that my holiday decorating journey was not linear, not peaceful, not elegant like Gary's, but certainly memorable. I picked up the fallen lights, slung them over my arm, and made a decision. "Okay," I said quietly. "Time for Plan D." Gary paled. "What is Plan D?" Linda braced herself. "Should I get the first aid kit?" I took a deep breath. "Plan D," I declared, "is simple." I pointed at the bushes. "We decorate everything." Linda gasped. Gary clutched his scarf. Daisy wagged her tail violently. Because Plan D wasn't about tastefulness, or elegance, or even logic. Plan D was about joy. Wild, glowing, chaotic joy. And if my yard couldn't be classy, it would be legendary. Plan D. You know when you say something out loud and immediately think, well, there's no turning back now? That was me. standing in the middle of my yard holding a half-scorched light strand, while Linda blinked slowly and Gary clutched his scarf like a Victorian woman catching scandal. "Decorate everything?" Linda repeated carefully, as if she were confirming whether I had accidentally eaten too many gingerbread cookies. "Yes," I said, steely with purpose. "If the lights don't want to behave on the roof, then the roof doesn't get lights. The yard gets lights." Gary looked horrified. "Henry, everything?" "Everything," he whispered. "That includes your mailbox. Especially my mailbox." Daisy barked happily, which I interpreted as full emotional support. So I set to work. And in that moment, something inside me snapped in the most cheerful, liberating way possible. Suddenly, the pressure to be tasteful evaporated like steam off cocoa. All that remained was pure, unfiltered holiday enthusiasm, unhinged but joyful. I wrapped lights around the bushes, the trees, the stepping stones, the mailbox post, the garden gnome named Terrence who lives behind the hydrangeas. I even wrapped the rake leaning against the shed, because why not give the rake a chance to feel festive? Linda watched from the doorstep at first, hands in her robe pockets, smiling the kind of smile you give a child proudly finger painting on the walls. "You're having fun," she said softly. "Oh," I said, stringing lights across a decorative rock. "You have no idea." Daisy trotted behind me, carrying stray bulbs in her mouth like she was supervising inventory. Occasionally, she dropped one at my feet with the enthusiasm of a foreman supplying materials. "You're very helpful," I told her. She wagged her tail and immediately trotted off to chew on a pine cone. By the time the last strand of lights was anchored to a suspiciously wobbly lawn ornament, I stepped back and admired the yard. Was it elegant? Absolutely not. Was it controlled? Not even remotely. Did it look like a magical Christmas explosion, a joyful electrical confetti storm, a glittering celebration of holiday chaos? Oh yes. Linda walked down the driveway, eyes wide. "Henry, this is something." "It's beautiful," I said proudly. "It's definitely something," she repeated, choosing her words carefully. From across the lawn, Gary approached slowly. Like a man approaching a glittery meteorite he does not fully trust, he stared and stared and stared. At last, he spoke. "Henry, it looks like your yard is yelling." "Thank you," I said. "I don't think it's meant to be a compliment." "It is in my heart." Gary pinched the bridge of his nose. "You have lights on your shovel." "It was chilly," I said. "It deserved a sweater." He sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of 50 years of organized garages and classically restrained decor. And then, the moment arrived, plugging it in. Linda stood beside me. Daisy sat at my feet. Gary hovered behind us like a safety marshal bracing for the emotional fallout. I took the cord, the one that had survived Daisy, the garage avalanche, mild electrocution concerns, and held it dramatically. "This is it," I whispered. Linda squeezed my hand. "Go for it, sweetheart." I plugged it in. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, whoom! My entire yard erupted into radiant, shimmering, blinking, cheerful light. Every bulb, every strand, every object in my yard transformed into holiday bedazzlement. The shovel sparkled. Terrence the gnome glowed like a wise miniature lighthouse keeper. The mailbox glistened like it had received mail from the North Pole. Even the rake looked proud. Linda gasped. "Oh my, it's like the inside of a snow globe," Daisy barked triumphantly. And Gary, dear, tasteful, Scandinavian-influenced Gary, covered his mouth with both hands and whispered, "My retinas." The lights were bright, not offensively bright, not blinding, just extremely enthusiastic. They blinked in patterns that suggested jazz hands. They twinkled in chaotic harmony. They created an ambiance that said, very loudly, "Henry lives here, and he tried his best." I stood in awe, in pride, in a mild spike of adrenaline. "This," I said, "is everything I ever wanted." Linda looped her arm through mine. "It really is. Joyful." Gary took a few steps closer, squinting. "You know, I have to admit something." I waited, stunned, because Gary admitting anything is a rare event, like seeing a shooting star wearing a sweater. "This display," he said slowly, "is not tasteful." "I know," I said, "and not balanced. Absolutely not. And certainly not following any established decorating principles. None whatsoever. But," he said, surprising himself, "it's happy." I grinned. "Exactly." He looked at the glowing rake, then the mailbox, then Terence the enlightened gnome. His shoulders softened. "It's very you." Linda nodded. "That's why I like it." We all stood there, 3 adults, 1 radiant yard, and 1 dog who had stolen a string of unlit bulbs and was trotting proudly in circles, soaking in the moment. Then, as if on cue, the first snowflake drifted down, just one, followed by another, and suddenly the yard wasn't just glowing, it was sparkling under a gentle blanket of snow, transforming the chaos into something undeniably magical. Even Gary whispered, "Well, that's actually beautiful." I nudged him gently. "Don't let your ladder hear you say that." He snorted, which, coming from Gary, is basically a belly laugh. And that, the lights, the snow, the neighbors warming just a little toward my questionable decisions, felt like exactly what the holidays should be. Messy, warm, silly, beautiful in ways that never go according to plan. Later that evening, Linda and I stood inside by the window watching the lights twinkle under the snowfall. Daisy curled up at our feet, tired from supervising. A mug of cocoa warmed my hands. "You know," Linda murmured, "for all the chaos, today was really lovely." I nodded. "Chaos is my artistic medium," she smirked. "Should we fix the roof lights tomorrow?" "No," I said, staring proudly at the glowing rake. "Tomorrow, we improve the shovel." She laughed and rested her head on my shoulder. Outside, the lights blinked in their wild, joyful rhythm. Not perfect, not elegant, but absolutely, unmistakably ours. And for once, even I wouldn't change a thing. Thanks for sharing this holiday chaos with me, friend. If you'd like more cozy, silly bedtime stories from Nap Giggles, come curl up with the next adventure anytime. Sleep well, stay warm, and may your lights never tangle unless it makes a great story.